There's a TV show called Band of Brothers that is one of my favorite shows. And it's a dramatic miniseries that chronicles the 101st Airborne Easy Company as they spearhead the counter-invasion of France into World War II. And it is lauded and it is praised for the fantastic job it does of detailing the rigorous and difficult mission that the paratrooper units were called to do. And one of the most compelling portions to me of the show, we see Easy Company called to reinforce against the German attack in the forest of Bastogne. And what had happened was, as the Allies were pushing up, they'd kind of spread themselves a bit thin, and the Germans, being desperate to try to stop the invasion, had caught the Allies off balance in what we would coin later as the Battle of the Bulge. And this happened in December and January of 1944 and 1945. Easy Company and the rest of the 101st were called without proper winter clothing or ample ammunition to hole up in the forest and hold off the German advances until more Allied reinforcements could arrive. And as they were marching into the woods to do what they were called to do, they received word that the Germans had captured the towns that were behind them, which is bad because now they are surrounded. And they were told, hey, you're surrounded. And famously, Captain Winters replied, we're paratroopers. We're supposed to be surrounded. And history then tells us that the 101st were successful in holding the line and went on to spearhead the invasion of Germany. But this morning, I want you to consider the implications of what it would mean to be surrounded by your enemies. See, it's more than just trying to figure out who's shooting at you or from what direction they're shooting at you from. It's where are we going to get supplies from? It's where are we going to get ammunition from? It's where are we going to take our wounded? Where are we going to get food from? How are we going to do the job we've been called to do when we are surrounded by the enemy? So being surrounded and being isolated is not a good thing. The historical context of Psalm 3 is similar. You can read about it in 2 Samuel 13 through 18. Just a brief synopsis. David's son, Absalom, has successfully turned the hearts of the people against the king. And David has been forced to flee Jerusalem with the contingency of people who are still with him. So he's leaving his throne. He's running away. And he's surrounded by people who want to kill him. He's isolated. He may be tempted to think that everything is over for him. His king. This has happened to so many kings beforehand. Saul was surrounded. This could be over for me. And he may be tempted to think that God has abandoned him. And this is the historical context of Psalm 3. This is what caused David to write the psalm. Look at how he begins the psalm in verse 1. O Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God. But notice how David describes his enemies. They are those who claim that there is no salvation for him in God. They are those who are actively trying to destroy David's hope, David's peace, and David's joy in God. And the interesting thing about the context of 1 is that these enemies are the doing of David's own sin with Bathsheba. So his sin, and also there's some other sin tied up into why Absalom is so upset as well. So David could even be thinking, I've created this problem for me. And now I'm surrounded by it, and now I have no way out from it. Now, I would be surprised if anyone here is currently on the run from thousands of people who want to kill them. I'm not going to rule it out, but I would be surprised. Even though we don't find ourselves in the exact circumstances that David was in, right now, this morning, when you go home, you are going to be surrounded by enemies and by problems that are going to try to convince you that there is no salvation for you in God. They're going to try to convince you that God is not working for your joy. They're going to try to convince you that God is not for you. You are surrounded by thousands of enemies that are going to try to take your joy in God. And the way that they assault us most of the time is they give us pain or discomfort. And this pain and this discomfort is given to fool us into believing that God is against us. The presence of pain to humans is almost always perceived as God being against us. Think about that. When pain comes into your life, what is your initial reaction? Is it God is for me or God is against me? If you're being honest, you're like me. I think you would say God is against me. When pain comes into your life, you think God is against me. So this is exactly what David is experiencing. He has enemies that are trying to tell him there's no salvation for you in God. You are surrounded by enemies that are telling you there's no joy for you in God. Let me outline a couple of these possible scenarios. And they come in big and small, right? Trials come in big and small. Let's look at a couple. I want you to imagine that you're driving your car. Many of these enemies seem to show up when you're driving your car, right? Let's imagine that you're driving along the highway and you see your exit coming up, okay? And we've all been here, all right? So you go to merge and you check your blind spot and there's a car there, okay? And you go, all right, well, I guess I'm just going to have to wait for them to pass. So you start to slow down. But then it seems as though they're kind of like slowing down too. So then you're like, okay, well, I guess I'm just going to have to go ahead of them. So you hit the gas, and then what happens? They hit the gas too, okay? And then you see them take your exit, and you are stuck going straight when you wanted to turn off. In that moment, very subtly, you can be tempted to think that God is against you. Okay? It shows up in the small things too. Let's look at the second one. Imagine that you're at your job and you're part of a team of people tasked to accomplish certain things. And you very quickly figure out that you are the only person on your team who cares about the outcome of the job. Okay? You're the only one who works hard. You're the only one that really cares about what happens with the job. And your team, your manager calls you and he gives you guys an assignment, okay? And despite your best efforts, the assignment does not go well and your team fails. And your manager calls you all in, chews you all out, writes you all up, and you're just sitting there like, and there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you could say. There's nothing. You just have to take it. When that happens, you could be tempted to think that God is against you. You could be tempted to think God is not for me in this. Otherwise, He wouldn't put me through these painful things. Let's look at another one. It's perhaps a little more serious. It could be something like the distance that seems to be growing between you and your spouse. Things have been stressful lately. You've grown apart because of the distance. Each of you turn inward and start to look out for yourself and your own needs. This creates a very frustrating spiral of events as you both become more and more selfish, more and more turned inward, more and more looking out for yourselves. And it results, excuse me, it results with each of you being unable to speak generous, kind words to each other. Your relationship becomes nothing more than coordinating the kids and the meals. You desire much more in your relationship, but it seems impossible at this point. The tension in your marriage can definitely make you feel as though God is against you. Or lastly, perhaps you're at a doctor appointment, a routine doctor visit, and he sees something he doesn't particularly like, and he says, you know what, let's have an extra blood test or an extra test or whatever. And he says, I just want to cover all my bases. I just want to look at this one last thing. Don't worry about it. Takes it, sends you home, says, hey, don't worry about it, which is impossible. And a few days later, you get a phone call that you've been dreading. You are informed that you have a very serious illness and you need to start radical treatment right away. And everything in your life changes in the moment. In a blink of an eye, it's all different now. And in these dark moments, it can especially be tempting to think that God is against me. God is not for me. If God was for me, he wouldn't give me this pain. You can think that. It's very easy to do that. The essence of our enemies, the essence of the assault that's happening to you, to your kids, to your spouse, to your family, to your neighbors, to your friends, each and every single day. The essence of the attack is that God is not for your joy. God is not for your happiness. God is not for your peace. This pain is a sign that God does not love you. And that's what we're being attacked about. That's how we're being attacked. And this is exactly where David was at. He was leaving the kingdom. Sure, it was because of his sin, but he was God's king. It was supposed to. Surely he was thinking, God, you said my children would be ruling in my throne, and now I am being forced to leave because my son is trying to kill me. This is not the way that it should have gone. Do you care? Do you love me? Do you have a plan for me, God? And he could have been tempted to think that God was against him. But that's not the way he goes in the psalm. He doesn't go down that road, though he could have been tempted to go down that road. We are surrounded by enemies that try to convince us that joy cannot be found in God. The glory of this psalm is that David unabashedly and resolutely affirms that God is the sole source of happiness and joy, and that no matter how many enemies are stacked against him, no matter what happens to him in his life, he will remain firm in his faith that God is radically for him. And he lays that out for us in verses 3 through 4. But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory and the lifter of my head. I cried aloud to the Lord, and he answered me from his holy hill. We mustn't buy into the lies that surround us. If the essence of our enemies is the attempt to convince us that God is not for our joy, then the essence of faith is the radical idea that God, through the pain, through the bad tests, through the hard work environment, through the rough marriage, through all of those things, that God is working them all out for your joy. That is faith. Faith, that is faith. And faith is keenly apparent in the face of pain. In fact, it shines brightest in the midst of pain. David's resolute faith in the midst of this pain in Psalm 3 is glorious for us all to see even now. But notice how David attempts and succeeds at bolstering his faith in the midst of the pain. Okay? How is it bolstered? Well, firstly, it's bolstered by reaffirming who God is to him. Reaffirming who God is and what God has done for David in the past. He's his shield, his glory, the lifter of his head. And by understanding what this means for David in his life, David can then walk resolutely in faith with God after remembering all the ways that God has provided for him in the past. So, his shield. Well, David would recount things like fighting Goliath, fighting the lion, all of his exchanges with Saul, all of his battles with the Philistines, and many other occurrences that seems like, to human eyes, David, you don't have a chance. But with God, no matter how bad the odds are, as your shield, you have the chance. You are good to go with God. He knows how many times God upheld him and delivered him. His faith is also bolstered by remembering how God has brought purpose into his life, right? Living for God is David's purpose. It's his glory. I think that's what he means by saying, God is my glory. God is the reason. God is everything that I do everything for. And if you read David, this is clear that he lived to glorify God. Now, he had issues, of course, major issues, but ultimately he lived to glorify God. And someone who has brought purpose into every aspect of your life cannot surely be against your joy. So, his shield, his glory, the lifter of his head. David remembers the many times his face was downcast and that God brought it up. And he remembers his sin. He remembers his sin with Bathsheba, caused his face to go down. He remembers his grievous treatment with Uriah. He remembers his child dying because of it. He remembers even his sin with Absalom and Amnon and Tamar here in this text. He remembers how he's failed God. He remembers how he's been a total loser, how he's been completely opposite in the way that he should have been. And he remembers in those moments, those dark moments of turmoil, how God has come to him and has said, lift your face. I've forgiven you. David has stood over the chasm of his sin and of the darkness of his sin. And he's felt the radiant grace of God come over him in those moments. And because God is there for you in the moments where you need forgiveness, he will certainly be there when you need provision from him to get through the trials that you're in. The one who can forgive us in our most desperate times will certainly be there for us, even in our most painful times. The God who loves us through sin will always certainly be there for us in our joy. We too can do what David has done here in this verse. We too can remember the deliverance of God, how he's given us purpose to live for his glory, and all those times he lifted our heads out of the darkness. We must run to these realities when we are faced with our vast enemies. We must remember, we must write them down, we must tell them to each other. But, in spite of all the past ways that God has delivered us, it still can be difficult to respond in faith. We experience this all the time. I mean, practically speaking, this is David's second time of being on the run from people who want to kill him, right? Like he's like, here we go again, as he leaves the kingdom. Like I'm running from someone in high power who wants to kill me. And we would kind of think, hey, if it's your second time through it, it should be easier, right? Is that the way trials work? The second time you go through something similar, it's easier the second time? No, it's not. Actually, sometimes it can be harder because you're frustrated that you have to go through it again. So just because God has delivered us in the past, and that should be enough for us to trust Him in the future, God gives us more grace to go on as we try to go through these trials. And that grace is, He says, ask me for help. He says, ask me for help. Look at what David does. Verse 4, I cried aloud to the Lord, and He answered me from His holy hill. So David's not just saying, yeah, God's got me in the past, I'm good for the future. David's looking at what he's done for in the past, and he's saying, yeah, and then he's going, I'm still afraid, I'm still struggling, I'm still fighting doubt, I'm still fighting the idea that you're against me, God. Help me believe that you are for my joy. And God says, I will. James, in chapter 1, goes through this idea. It's going to be on the screen. Excuse me. James says, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Great idea. I'd love to do that. The problem is it's very hard. And James says, well, if it's hard, and it will be, if any of you lacks wisdom, I think what he means by that is, if any of you lacks the ability to do what I just told you to do, you should what? Ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to them. So what you need right now to make it through the trial you're facing is abundantly available to you in God. You just have to ask. Cry aloud to the Lord, and He will answer you. So David calls out to God, knowing that God will certainly give us all we need to overcome our enemies of doubt. David calls out to God for help. We too should call out to God for help. What I appreciate about James in this text is the words without reproach. Without reproach. I frequently use the illustration in this text that if you've ever asked your older sibling for something in life, you know what it means to be given something with reproach. You know what it means. You can't do it? Okay, you know what? I'll help you with this, but you really need to get your stuff together on this, okay? You really can't do this on your own? Okay, I'll help you, but you need to figure out how to do this on your own at some point. But that is not how God helps us. This is not how God helps us. God helps us without reproach. He doesn't expect us to have finally mastered everything on our own. He desires for us to come to Him and to approach Him. If all of your battles of unbelief, big or small, in all of them, big or small, God will never be displeased with you if you call to Him for help. Never, not once. The reason why is the calling out is a manifestation of faith. Because you are admitting, I can't do this on my own. I need God's help to do this. And God says, wise move. You can't do it on your own. You do need my help, and I'm going to give you my help because this is the way that it works. You are incomplete on your own, but I can complete you, and I'm happy to do it. In fact, calling out to God for rescue is the essence of the gospel. It's the heart of it. And it pleases Him exceedingly. So David calls to God, and God doesn't say, you know what, I've helped you so many times with this thing. It's the same sin, it's the same worry, it's the same problem. I've helped you so many times. You know what, this time you need to figure it out for yourself. That is not at all the God we serve. The God we serve says, let's do it. Here you go. You can do it now. And that is the pattern of faith that we need to develop. So, like David, we are surrounded by vices that try to convince us that God is not for our joy. Resolute faith that God is certainly for us is the only way to combat them. The way David goes about bolstering his faith is through remembering who God was for him in the past and by calling out to God for help. And now we will see the result of resolute faith. We will see what happens when we walk in faith. What happens when you approached by an enemy of trying to steal your joy, trying to tell you God's not for you, that you cannot be saved in God. What happens when you respond to that enemy in faith? What happens? There's two things that happen. First thing, verse 5. I lay down and slept. I woke again, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of many thousands of people who have set themselves against me all around. The result of the one who puts their faith in God despite all of the enemies and all of the problems that are around them, that are assailing them all around, is complete and utter peace. Think about the practical significance of David's context and talking about going to sleep. Why would he not want to go to sleep? I might get killed. Like, they might attack, they might know where I'm at right now. They might be waiting for me to go to sleep. And the moment I fall asleep, they're going to come kill me. That is probably the context, right? He's on the run from thousands of people who want to kill him. How often has sleep robbed you? Or how often is sleep robbed from your eyes? How often do you struggle to fall asleep? How often is your mind consumed with problems? How often are you talking to somebody and you can't hear a word they are saying because you are worrying about something in your mind? How often do you replay over and over again something that happened, wondering if you should have done something differently? These are patterns and signs of not faith, but of disbelief. They are signs of doubt. They are signs that your enemies are overrunning you. They are signs that they are successfully attacking you, successfully robbing your joy in God. You see, at the heart of faith is rest and peace. At the heart of doubt is restlessness and anxiety. Why? Why is that? Well, you're trusting two different people in each situations, right? With doubt, you're trusting yourself. And that's why you're consumed with it. Because it's up to you to find a way out of it, right? That's why you think about it all the time. That's why you think about it from many different angles. That's why you don't want to sleep, because you want to figure out a way through it. Because it's up to you. Faith is not like that. Faith says, God has it. God will protect me. God will take care of everything. God will move me through this, and even if it costs me everything, I am going to rest in Him. Faith resorts to resting it all on God. Faith trusts God. Faith knows that He can handle it. And faith dozes off because it has nothing to worry about. David slept and woke because God sustained him. Let me give you this illustration. What is the difference? Now, this is obvious, but what is the difference between falling asleep at the wheel of a car or falling asleep in the passenger seat of the car? Well, there's a huge difference, right? Massive difference. Okay. But how many of you struggle to sleep in a car that you're not driving? Okay, so there's one of two reasons for that. A, you don't trust the driver, okay? Or B, you may trust him, but you know you're a better driver than they are, right? So you're struggling. You can't. The thing is funny, but the thing is, we do this with God. We do this with God. We're like, even if we've moved to the passenger seat and we say, okay, God, you can drive, we're still like, hey, slow down, we're coming up quick. Hey, there's the turn. Hey, we're backseat driving. We're like totally not at peace. What faith looks like is you cashed out in the passenger seat and saying, hey, wake me up when we get there. That's what faith, that is the essence of faith, is complete and utter reliance upon God. It's not backseat driving. It's not trying to grab the wheel. It's not any of that kind of stuff. It's wake me up when you get there. That is what faith is. It's rest. It's peace. It's joy. And let me ask you, which one would you rather have? Do you rather be anxious, awake at night? Is staying up all night worrying about something fun? It's terrible. It's awful. It's the worst. Losing sleep is the worst. Which one would you rather have? Think inwardly at this point. Would you say that your life is marked by peace or by restlessness? Is it marked by sleep or sleeplessness? One is a sure sign of faith, the other is a sign of doubt. I pray that our lives are marked by the reward of faith, peace, and rest. So, the result of resolute faith in the face of a multitude of enemies is daily peace in God. So it's an amazing reward. This peace occurs because we turn over control to God. No matter what happens, no matter what comes at me, no matter what enemies attack me, God, you need to help me through these things. I'm going to trust in you. I'm not going to trust in myself anymore. I'm not going to try to drive. I'm going to trust you. And when we fail to do that, we feel restless. We feel like we got to do something. We got to keep doing. We got to figure it out. We got to plan for contingencies. We got to, what if this happens? We got to have responses in our mind, trying to figure out if it's on us. It's got to be on us. We can't do it. But as wonderful as that is, as amazing as that is, as sustaining as peace can be through your life now, peace in the midst of pain and of trials, as amazing as that can be for you today, it is not the extent of what God has provided for you if you would trust in Him. It's not all that God has given you. It's not all. There's something else. And we see that in verse 7 and 8. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for you strike all my enemies on the cheek. You break the teeth of the wicked. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessings be on your people. Faith not only looks to God to deliver us when our enemies surround us, it looks to the day where God will utterly annihilate and destroy every enemy that sets itself against Him and His people. Faith waits with anticipation for the day that God will finally set everything back in order, and there will be absolutely nothing left to assail us. Those thousands of enemies that surround you, as you walk out these doors, will be attacked when you go home. They will all be gone. They will all be destroyed. Notice what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15. Then comes the end, when He delivers the kingdom of God the Father after destroying every rule and every authority and power. For He must reign until He has put all His enemies under His feet. The last enemy to be destroyed is death. Even death itself will fall before Christ. And Paul says in Romans 8, for I consider that the sufferings, this is our enemies, are the sufferings of this present time, are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. Going down further, for in this hope we are saved. The hope that the sufferings you're going through now will be ended. That hope we are saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope. You can't see this end. You don't know this. It would be, you can't see this actually happening. You have to have hope. You have to have faith. For who hopes for what he sees? But if we hope For what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. We are waiting for these enemies to be put down and for us to be free from them. Faith looks to the end of the battles that you're fighting today. Faith trusts that God will conclude all of these things and will finally carry you through to the other side of them. Faith looks to the time where the peace you feel in the midst of pain will be overwhelming peace where there is pain. James talks about this in chapter 5. Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it, until it receives the early and the late rains. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. And what this means, and if you don't get anything else from the sermon at all this morning, I want you to get this point, is that each and every battle that you're facing today is temporary. Each and every pain you have right now has an expiration date. It's temporary. It's passing away. There is no trouble that can follow you where God is intending to take you. There is no trouble that can follow you where God is intending to take you. There is no pain that can traverse eternity. Our souls and our resurrected bodies will outlast any pain or enemy we shall face in this temporary world. You don't have to take my word for it. You can look at what Christ says. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. And God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away. And it's this reality that pain is temporary. It's this reality that is critical to your success in enduring trials with faith. It's this reality that this is going to end, and I'm going to come out the other side of it, and it's going to be over forever. Not over until the next one, over forever. That is critical to walking through those trials with faith. James says, chapter 1, Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial. Why? For when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. Your pain is temporary. God's peace is eternal. What a magnificent truth. There's one more thing we have to outline from this text before we look to try to apply it. We must understand that the faith we've been talking about, the faith that I've been compelling you to walk in, faith that I've been saying you need in your life, is faith in the gospel. It's faith in Christ coming as a man to deliver us from our sins, to deliver us from our enemies, and to bring us back to God. The gospel is our rudder to navigate the trials we are currently battling. The reason you can get over a bad diagnosis, the reason you can get over marital issues, the reason you can get over all of those problems is because of the gospel. It's because of the grace that God has provided for you in the gospel. The gospel is our future hope. The gospel is the largest proof we have that God is for us as well. When we are tempted to believe the lie of our enemies, that God is not for us, I want you to imagine the cross and take the idea that God is not for me, and put your name in that sentence. God is not for Alex. And then I want you to look at the cross and what happened on the cross. And those two ideas cannot coexist. Those two ideas cannot coexist. Would God send his son to a people that he was not radically for? Would Christ die for a people he was not radically for? It is understanding and believing in the very essential and key doctrine that we can be freed from the petty unbelief that God is against us in anything. I want to read you this quote, we're going through this study in our 1 John class on Wednesdays, so hopefully this will just show you kind of, if you're not coming, this will show you what you're missing out on. Let me read you this quote. It's lengthy, but just stick with me. It's very good. Remember, and he's speaking about this very idea. Remember, then, what he has already destroyed, and look forward in anticipation the blessed hope that faces us as Christian people. He will destroy these works of the devil utterly, completely, and finally. Evil and sin will be finally destroyed, out of existence, burnt, destroyed forever. God shall be all and in all, and if we are in the army of the mighty victor who has already risen from the grave and thereby conquered death, if we belong to him, we shall behold that final judgment of Satan, and we shall dwell for all eternity in a perfect state with no sin and no sorrow, with no sighing and no tears. There will be no need even for the sun itself, for the light of the glory will be the face of this self-same Lord, who was born as a babe in Bethlehem. And we shall bask in that glorious sunshine, entirely freed from sin forever and ever. The Son of God was manifested, appeared, came into this world, that he might destroy the works of the devil. Thank God for the victor who came, who could conquer even the last enemy, death itself, and give us life, which is life indeed. I so appreciate Martin Lloyd-Jones and his sermons on 1 John, because they highlight this idea that the gospel frees us from every pain that you're going through. And by believing and trusting in the gospel, you can have life, which is true life indeed, which is just absolutely soaked in the peace of God. So, faith in the gospel frees us from these things. And doubt enslaves us in it. So I compel you to believe the gospel today. If you've believed the gospel, I compel you to go over it again in your mind and remind yourself of it. How absolutely critical the gospel is to every aspect of our lives. So, let's try to think about this practically. I got a couple points I want to make. First one. You must, in order to walk through these trials with faith, the enemies you're going to face today, tomorrow, this week, in order to do it by faith, you have to start looking at your pain as purposeful. You have to start looking at your pain as purposeful. You have to start looking at your trials and thinking, this must be what it's going to take to make me like Christ. This must be what God needs to do in order to make me like Christ. No matter how bad it is, you have to start looking at it that way. Pain that is purposeless is awful. But pain that is purposeful, though it hurts, is a good thing. Look at Christ. Did he look at his pain as purposeless or as purposeful? He looked at his pain as purposeful. I'm buying a bride. I'm buying these people. I'm coming to die for them. I'm bringing them back to God. The pain I feel now is creating a better reality for them afterwards. The pain you're going through now is creating a greater reality for you afterwards. Not to mention how you will bless your kids and your spouse and the people you work with by becoming more like Christ. The pain you feel is beneficial because it's creating beneficial things. Secondly, so look at your pain as purposeful. There's a reason for it. Secondly, pain slams us into the present. If you don't believe that, hit your hand with a hammer. And then try to do your multiplication tables. Not going to happen, right? Why? All you can think about is how your hand is hurting. Pain slams you into the present. You can't think of anything else except for pain. Faith looks to the future. The key to overcoming present pain is future faith. Faith in the future. Future hope. Thirdly, we have a tendency to overlook small defeats in our battle of unbelief, right? If you're like me, that one's not a big deal. That one's a small thing, not a big deal, right? Yeah, I yelled at that guy or whatever. It's not a big deal. God's more concerned about other things. But even the smallest cracks can sink the biggest ships. The smallest cracks can sink the biggest ships. I want you to examine in your heart, where are you failing in the smallest ways? Where are you reacting with unbelief in the smallest ways? God cares about those small ways. Fourthly, being surrounded by enemies constantly can be isolating and exhausting. This is why communication with God is critical. How are you doing with that? This is why communication and communion with other believers is so critical. This is why we need each other, right? Because though we are isolated by our enemies, we are isolated together by a lot of similar enemies. So we can be helping each other. This is critical. Another point. Since all pain is temporary, your biggest ally is patience. Since all pain is temporary, your biggest ally is patience. That's a good thing, right? Because we're all really good at being patient. Just joking. We're not good at being patient. I think we all pray for patience, right? Pray that God gives us a patient heart. The biggest ally in pain is patience. The biggest enemy of patience is pride. The biggest enemy of patience is pride. Why? Because you think things should be going faster than they are. When you are impatient, you are telling God your timing is off. And my timing is better. This should happen now. So pray that God gives us a patient heart. And help us diagnose this, right? Impatience is not just a funny thing that we all struggle with. It's a rebellion against God. So I pray God gives us a patient heart. Much pain can be overcome with a patient heart. And lastly, you may be sitting here thinking, well, that's good, but I feel like more like David. And does God do the same things for us when we're the ones who caused the problems in the first place? When all the enemies around me are the outworkings of my own sin, is God still going to help me in those things? Well, this is what was going on with David. David caused these problems. David, his sin was the reason he was running. His sin was the reason he was living in a cave. And was God good to him? Was God going to deliver him? He was. Pastor Ben shared with me this morning a text in Micah 7. Micah is about to go, Judah is about to go into captivity. And they realize they're going to be enslaved by a sinful people, right? It's like Habakkuk, and they're struggling with that idea, and they're saying, how can God use these sinful people to judge His own people? And this is the response when your sin has caused the problems around you, and 9 times out of 10, this is going to be the case. That's that you need to have. Micah 7:8. Let me read this text. Rejoice not over me, O my enemy. When I fall, I shall rise. When I sit in darkness, the Lord will be a light to me. I will bear the indignation of the Lord because I have sinned against him until he pleads my cause and executes judgment for me. He will bring me out to the light. I shall look upon his vindication. Then my enemy will see, and shame will cover her who said to me, where is the Lord your God? My eyes will look upon her now. She will be trampled down in the mire of the street. So even when our enemies are the outworkings of our own sin, God is still radically for you, and faith is still your way out of those problems. So even if you've caused your problems, which you have, God is still there for you. God is still there for you. I'm going to have the musicians come up as we conclude. So, I want you to consider your situation this morning. Just think about what's going to happen. As you walk out of these doors, you're going to be confronted again. You're going to be told in 1,000 different ways that God is not for your joy. You mustn't listen to these lies. Have faith that God is for you. If you are struggling to believe it, call out to him. Doing so will bring you rest today and bright hope for tomorrow. Praise God for his glorious gospel that delivers us this wonderful truth.
Please stand.